What would you do if everything you thought you knew about your family turned out to be a mystery waiting to be solved? Patty Duke was America's sweetheart. She was the girl who lit up television screens in The Patty Duke Show and wowed audiences with her Oscar-winning talent. But behind the curtain, Patty's life was a storm of emotional battles, whirlwind romances, and deep personal struggles. She was bold, unpredictable, and deeply troubled. And in the middle of it all was a baby boy born into chaos, raised with love but haunted by one impossible question. For years, Patty's son Sean Astin was caught in the middle of a paternity mystery so tangled not even Patty herself had a clear answer. Was it her young Hollywood boyfriend, the husband she barely knew, or the man who stepped in and raised Sean as his own? It took decades, 3 possible fathers, and one shocking DNA test to finally uncover the truth. And the answer was so shocking, it's not who anyone expected. Patty Duke struggles. To understand why this story is hands down one of the most complicated dramas to unfold in Hollywood, you need to know who Patty Duke really was. Because this story doesn't start with her son Sean Astin. It starts with a teenage girl who grew up in front of the cameras, lived 1,000 lifetimes in one, and left behind a legacy that was as beautiful as it was messy. Patty Duke was a child star who lit up Hollywood like fireworks on the 4th of July. She broke into the entertainment world at just 8 years old, and by her early teens, she was already being hailed as one of the most talented young actresses in America. But her big breakthrough came in 1962 when she starred as Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker. At only 16 years old, she won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, making her the youngest Oscar winner at the time in that category. While most kids her age were stressing over math homework, Patty was busy giving Oscar speeches. From there, her career skyrocketed, and she became a household name with The Patty Duke Show, where she played identical cousins Patty and Kathy Lane. It was charming, funny, and massively successful. But behind all that fame and charm, Patty's real life was anything but picture perfect. What the world didn't see was that behind the scenes, Patty was suffering silently and painfully for years. She was basically used by her managers, who took over her life as a child. She was pushed into the spotlight, overworked, and controlled. She even later confessed that those managers treated her inappropriately. However, nothing was ever done because back then she had no voice and no one to protect her. As she grew older, the cracks began to show. Patty battled severe mood swings, extreme highs and lows, and unpredictable behavior that no one around her could explain. It wasn't until years later that she was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition she openly talked about in her later years, when she became a fierce advocate for mental health awareness. But back in the 60s and 70s, Patty was spiraling, and nobody really knew why. To make matters worse, her love life was just as chaotic as her mental health journey. She was the type to fall in love hard and fast. And so her relationships were often intense, short-lived, and confusing. By her early 20s, she had already been through multiple romances and marriages, some of them barely lasting more than a week. The problem was, she had a pattern of getting into relationships during her manic episodes, when she was full of energy, wildly impulsive, and emotionally driven. But sadly, as the mood shifted, so did everything else, and the love would often turn to chaos fast. Unfortunately, this whirlwind of romance, heartbreak, and instability led to one of the biggest mysteries of her life, and the question that would haunt her for decades. In 1971, Patty gave birth to a baby boy. And while the birth of a child is normally a time of joy, in Patty's case it became the center of a Hollywood scandal. Why? Because no one, including Patty herself, was sure who the father was. You see, Patty had been romantically linked to multiple men around the same time. The timeline was blurred, her memory was foggy, and her emotions were all over the place. Remember that this was at a time when her mental health was unmedicated, untreated, and generally misunderstood. She was married very briefly to one man, involved with another, and still emotionally connected to a third, all at the same time. So when baby Sean was born, there were 3 very different men who could have been his biological father. But the problem began when Patty revealed that she was convinced she knew who it was. Of course, the tabloids had a field day. Rumors swirled, headlines speculated, and everyone wanted to know who the father of her child was. But what made this story so much more than just tabloid gossip was the emotional weight behind it. Patty wasn't just some Hollywood diva creating drama. She was a woman dealing with a very real, very raw, and internal battle with her mental health, her memory, and her relationships. And so she truly believed she was giving her son the right answers. But as the years went on, even Sean started to wonder if the story his mother told him was indeed the real story. Who is Sean Astin? On February 25, 1971, the world welcomed Patty Duke's baby boy, who would grow up to be a beloved actor, a family man, and, unbeknownst to him at the time, the center of one of Hollywood's most confusing paternity scandals. You probably remember Sean Patrick Astin first as Mikey in the movie The Goonies. He was just a kid back then, but even in that role, he had something special. While other child stars fizzled out, Sean kept building slowly and steadily without burning out or breaking down under the pressure. And that alone is rare in Hollywood. Things completely changed for him in Hollywood when he bagged the role of Samwise Gamgee. When the Lord of the Rings films were first announced, all eyes were on Elijah Wood, Viggo Mortensen, or even Ian McKellen. But as the trilogy unfolded, it was Sean's character Sam who quietly stole the entire story. And this was how he earned recognition and fame in the industry. But here's the thing, even after all that, Sean never leaned into fame. He didn't go chasing tabloid attention or big Hollywood scandals. Despite being the son of a very famous actress, he took a different route by staying grounded while so many others got lost in the fame. He also went on to earn an Academy Award nomination, but not for acting. He directed and co-produced a short film called Kangaroo Court, which was nominated for Best Live-Action Short Film in 1995. A lot of people don't even know he was behind that. And then, like clockwork, he popped up again in Stranger Things. And once again, he stole the show. But most people never knew that while he was busy achieving all that success in Hollywood, his personal life was so complicated in a way that no one could have expected. For years, Sean carried around a burden and a question. And eventually, he decided to seek out answers to that question. Sean Astin's potential fathers. From the very moment Sean Astin entered the world, his life was already tangled in question marks. And no one, not even his mother Patty, could say for sure who his father really was. Yet when he was born, she had to give the world an answer, despite being uncertain about his paternity. But let's talk about the three men Patty was connected to, starting with the least likely and most bizarre man on the list, Michael Tell. Michael Tell was a writer, music promoter, and was virtually unknown to the public. He met Patty Duke in 1970, and he had been subletting her apartment during a particularly unstable and emotional period in her life. The two had a brief fling, but it wasn't a relationship and it wasn't even really a friendship. But then something strange happened. Patty found herself pregnant. And so, because she was worried about the rumors and the potential scandal, she made a snap decision to get married to Michael Tell. They got married in a civil ceremony, no glitz, no glamour, just a quick, almost panicked move to protect her public image. However, unfortunately, the marriage only lasted for 13 days. Patty had the union annulled and insisted that the marriage had nothing to do with love or even genuine commitment. Instead, it was just a cover-up. 4 years afterward, she denied that Michael Tell could possibly be Sean's father. She even claimed the two had never even consummated their relationship. In her mind, he was simply a name on a piece of paper, a mistake she erased just as quickly as it had happened. However, this name, Michael Tell, would come back around in the most shocking way ever. The next man on Patty's list was Desi Arnaz Jr. Desi Arnaz was the son of television legends Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz Sr. from I Love Lucy. He was Hollywood royalty, a heartthrob, a musician, an actor. And at the time he met Patty Duke, he was still quite young. In fact, their relationship was a major scandal. The age difference between them and the fact that she was an emotionally fragile young woman made it the kind of thing that made the media curious. Some reports even had it that Lucille Ball herself was furious about the romance and tried to end it. She didn't want her teenage son tangled up in what she likely saw as a reckless, unstable affair. But Patty was convinced that Desi Jr. was the one. 4 years, she told Sean that Desi was his biological father. And honestly, at first, the theory made sense, the timing lined up. However, Desi never publicly claimed Sean as his son, but he didn't fight the rumors either. He stayed mostly silent, avoiding drama and the media frenzy. And so for much of Sean's early life, the narrative was that his mom was a famous actress while his dad was the son of Lucy and Desi. He believed it all until much later when he learned the shocking truth. And then there was the man who gave Sean his last name, John Astin, who most people know as Gomez Addams from the Addams Family. In the mid-1970s, Patty Duke married John Astin and the two raised Sean together. John adopted Sean legally, giving him his last name. To the world and even to Sean himself, John was his father. John and Patty went on to have another son together, Mackenzie Astin, who also became an actor, and for many years their family unit appeared stable and even loving. Despite the rocky start, Patty had found some peace. John was steady, grounded, and kind. Sean adored him, and growing up he believed John Astin was his real father, not just emotionally, but biologically. However, it wasn't until much later in life that doubts and questions began creeping in. But here's where things get even more complicated, because over the years Patty Duke began to change her story. Not once, but multiple times. At first, she told Sean that John Astin was his father. And after a while, she began insisting that Desi Arnaz Jr. was the father instead. And then sometimes she'd dismiss both and vaguely suggest someone else. To many outsiders, it looked like she was just being evasive. But those close to her knew the truth. They knew the fact that Patty wasn't lying, she was just lost. Her bipolar disorder often distorted her perception of events, and she struggled to remember details clearly from those traumatic, chaotic years. And sadly, it seemed the guilt of not having a definite answer haunted her. She loved Sean fiercely, but she simply couldn't give him the closure he wanted. For Sean, it was heartbreaking. He loved his mother deeply. He respected John Astin as his father. He was even curious about Desi Arnaz Jr. but eventually, the confusion got to him, and deep down he just wanted to know who he really was. The doubts grew even bigger when he randomly met a relative of Michael Tell, who suggested that they were related, and this further complicated the already sensitive situation. And so, when the whispers grew louder and the questions wouldn't go away, he decided to find out the truth for himself. And that's when he made a bold decision to take a DNA test. He didn't do it out of spite or resentment. He did it out of curiosity, closure, and respect for himself and for the men who had each played a part in his life story. And what came next would change everything about his life and identity. The DNA test revelations. When Sean eventually gathered the courage to begin the DNA process, it was awkward. He had to reach out to the three men involved, John Astin, Desi Arnaz Jr., and Michael Tell, whom he barely knew at all. Michael had been out of the picture for decades. In fact, he and Patty had split before they really were a couple, and their marriage had been a whirlwind and a mystery itself. Still, Sean was polite, respectful, and direct. And luckily for him, Michael and the other men agreed to take the test. After the test was conducted, the waiting period began. Days stretched out like weeks, and this period was a tense one for Sean. However, it came with some sort of peace. Finally, he would have answers to the questions that have haunted him for years. Deep down, he was super nervous. What if the results confirmed something he wasn't ready to accept? What if they tore apart everything he thought he understood about his family? Finally, after what felt like forever, the results came in. Sean sat down, looked at the report, and there it was in black and white. Michael Tell was his biological father. The man Patty Duke had been married to for less than 2 weeks. The man who had all but vanished from the story was the biological link Sean had been searching for. This moment hit hard, not in a way that brought devastation, but in a way that brought stillness. However, Sean didn't react with anger or bitterness. In fact, that moment felt liberating. He reintroduced himself to People magazine, saying, "If you want to know who I am, John Astin is my father and Michael Tell is my biological father." Perhaps the best part of it all was the fact that the discovery didn't change the love he had for John Astin. In fact, it deepened his appreciation for him, because now Sean understood something even more special. And it was the fact that although DNA makes you biologically related, it is love that makes you family. And with that one truth finally uncovered, Sean could finally move forward with peace, clarity, and a full picture of who he was, not just as a son, but as a man, a father, and a storyteller in his own right. However, after the DNA results came out, a whole new chapter opened, one that Sean had never really prepared for. He had to start bonding with a man who hadn't been a real part of his story until that moment. Sean had to make the brave decision to reach out. Reports had it that their meeting wasn't dramatic or explosive. In fact, it was respectful and thoughtful. It was one that brought understanding, connection, and closure. What made the experience even smoother was the fact that Michael didn't resist Sean coming into his life. Although he has always maintained a relatively private life, he was reportedly super. Undiagnosed mental condition without any treatment, he knew her heart even if her choices had sometimes been flawed. Their relationship remained strong and deeply loving. In fact, their bond grew even more honest and intimate after the DNA test, especially after she promised to support him through that new phase. In a later interview, Sean opened up about his mother saying, "It wasn't always pretty and it wasn't always fun, but there was a lot of love. Even through her divorce, her attempts with her life, and horrible things, there was never a moment of doubt that she loved me. We were all in it together. We were all in the storm together." After Patty Duke passed away in 2016 from sepsis, Sean set up a foundation in her memory named the Patty Duke Mental Health Initiative to help advocate for mental health struggles. One of his final words about his mother was, "Above all, the way that I think of my mother, the thing that gives me such joy and reverence for her, is that above all else, she was a warrior." And this statement describes how loved Patty was by Sean. Despite her flaws and mistakes, Sean has often been asked how he processed the emotional roller coaster of finding out who his biological father was after growing up believing someone else held that title. Well, his response to this question will leave you in awe because that's exactly where his wisdom shines. Sean's perspective on fatherhood: by the time the world knew the full story of Sean Astin's paternity, he had already made peace with it. To some, the idea of having 3 possible fathers might sound like the setup for a soap opera. But for Sean, it was the reality of his life. And over time, he didn't just accept that truth, he came to embrace it. In interviews, he has made it clear that DNA doesn't define a dad. Yes, biology matters. Yes, the truth is important. But when it comes to love, guidance, and fatherhood, experience and relationships carry just as much weight. That's right, Sean doesn't choose between the 3 men. He has simply chosen to honor each relationship for what it is. John may not be his biological father, but he was the man who tucked him in at night, helped with homework, taught him discipline, and showed him what it meant to be a good man. John was the one there for birthdays, school plays, and teenage tantrums. And in Sean's heart, John is and always will be dad. In fact, in an interview he said, "I want to honor my relationships with the people who looked after me, especially John, who gave a huge amount of his time, energy, and love." Sean's relationship with Desi Arnaz Jr. was never close. They never had a deep father-son bond. And over time, Desi almost faded from the story. But still, Sean has never spoken about Desi with bitterness. He understands that back in the 1970s, Desi was just a young guy caught in the whirlwind of Hollywood gossip and scandal. Sean doesn't hold that against him. Instead, he looks at that chapter as part of the larger mystery that shaped his journey and ultimately led him to the truth. Finding out that Michael was his biological father was a life-altering moment, but not one that upended everything. Sean approached it with the same maturity and openness he brings to all areas of his life. Today, Sean speaks about Michael with a calm appreciation. They don't have a flashy or dramatic relationship, but they share a quiet understanding, and Sean has made peace with the part Michael plays in his life. Sean Astin's story isn't just about uncovering a biological truth. It's about redefining what family really means. He was raised by love. He searched for the truth. And when he found it, he didn't use it to rewrite history. Instead, he used it to complete the puzzle. Sean's journey proves that family isn't about neat definitions. It's about connection, choice, and the courage to embrace every part of your story, even the complicated ones. But what do you think? Did Sean make the right decision in getting a DNA test? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths.